She's awake. Everyone was amazed to see that Mrs. Zenos had come around, and they stared at her wide-eyed with disbelief. Nobody had ever thought that this young man would be able to cure Mrs. Zenos of something that even Dr. Alden found impossible. And he managed to do so with just several needles. The entire process had been nothing special and was just plain old needling techniques, but it was exactly because of how simple everything had been that they found it shocking. How is this possible? Dr. Alden was completely blown away by what he just witnessed. That was cerebral congestion, and she had been diagnosed as a vegetative patient, for goodness sake. It was such a complicated condition, and he managed to cure her with just several needles. He must be joking. She's awake. She's awake. Mom's awake. It took Ruby a while to register that her mother was finally awake, but when she snapped back to her senses, she jumped with joy. She had been utterly devastated when she got to know that her mother was in a vegetative state. It was a miracle that she could come around so soon. "Honey, how are you feeling?" George forced himself to calm down and quickly went up to check on his wife. "I feel a bit woozy, but apart from that, I'm fine." "What's wrong?" Mrs. Zenos was confused, as she only remembered what happened before she passed out. "That's great. It's great that you're feeling fine." George laughed happily after he was sure that his wife was no longer in any danger. "You really are a miracle healer, young man. I underestimated you. You have exceptional medical skills. I'm impressed." George shook Dustin's hand as a sign of respect. "Don't mention it. Just remember that reward you promised," Dustin said without any arrogance. He had only helped them because he felt that it was fate that they crossed paths, so it went without saying that he'd ask for payment. "Ha ha ha. I like how direct you are, young man. How much are you asking for?" "Just state your price," George said with a chuckle. "You pay however much you deem fit." Dustin left it to him to decide how much he was going to pay. So, George generously wrote him a $30 million check and handed it to him. "Please have this, young man. This is a token of my appreciation to you for saving my wife. If you ever run into any difficulties, just come to me, and I promise I'll help you out of it. Thanks." Dustin gave the check a flick and put it away in his pocket. What happened? Mrs. Zenos looked around, still trying to figure out what exactly happened to her. "Mom, you nearly lost your life due to intracranial hemorrhage. Dustin was the one that saved you." Ruby was quick to explain the situation to her mother. Intracranial hemorrhage? Mrs. Zenos was obviously shocked to hear that. Was it possible that he had been telling the truth all along? Had she wronged him? At the thought of that, she said remorsefully, "I'm truly sorry, young man. I hope you do not take my offensive words to heart. Don't worry about it. It's all in the past," Dustin said with a shake of his head. Hardly anyone would believe it if someone just came up to them and told them that they were going to suffer from intracranial hemorrhage. "Thank you, Dustin. Had it not been for you, things would have turned out horribly." Ruby had nothing but appreciation for Dustin. "Don't mention it. I've been paid for my work," Dustin said with a faint smile. "Your medical skills are out of this world, young man. Would you be interested in joining us? We desperately need talented people like you." Dr. Alden did not hesitate to invite Dustin to join them. His medical skills were truly miraculous, to say the least. It was amazing how he could bring someone from the brink of death back to consciousness with just several needles. Had it not been for his ego, Dr. Alden would have asked Dustin to be his mentor. "I have no such plans yet. We'll see when the opportunity arises." Dustin rejected him nicely. Then, without anyone asking, he quickly scribbled down a prescription and handed it to Ruby. "Remember to make sure that your mother takes her medications on time. She'll have to take them for about a month, and she'll be all right." "Thank you, Dustin." Ruby beamed brightly at him. "I have other plans, so I'll take my leave now." Dustin did not stay there much longer and left the hospital soon after. As he left the hospital, Dustin was suddenly reminded that he had yet to change Natasha's wound dressing today, so he hailed a cab and headed straight for the Harmon estate. In the Harmons' discussion room, Hector was leading a group of the Harmon family's key members in a meeting. They had divided opinions over the marriage arrangement. "Are you really going to break off the marriage alliance, Hector?" Have you ever considered what this would mean to the family? Trent asked with pinched brows. I've given things serious consideration, Trent. There shall be no marriage alliance. Hector meant what he said. The main agenda of the meeting today was to discuss the breaking off of the marriage alliance. The Grants had gone too far. He could not sit back and act like nothing had happened. The Grants are already livid over Jailer's death. If we tell them that we're breaking off the marriage alliance, they'll use that as an excuse to give us trouble, and when that happens, there's bound to be massive strife between the two families. Trent warned. The strife has already begun. From the moment the Grants framed me and messed with my daughter, there was already no alliance. What we need to do now is strengthen our defenses and be prepared, Hector said coldly. Must things really come to this? We'll be in a terrible predicament if we really burn bridges with the Grants. Trent's expression was tense. I wish that the family can develop in peace too, Trent. But with the difficulties we are facing, both internally and externally, people out there will only see it as an opportunity to take advantage of us if we do not act firmly. We cannot compromise anymore, Hector said with a resolute tone. If the Harmons backed off once, they'd have to do it again in the future, and the Grants would only behave even more ruthlessly at that time. Hector thought that it'd be better for the Harmons to face the Grants head-on while they still had the means to do so. And even if they lost, they'd lose with their heads held high. Why are you silent, Jacob? Talk some sense into Hector. Trent signaled at Jacob frantically to persuade Hector. What's the point? Hector is the head of the family. He has the final say in every matter. Jacob seemed to have given up on contributing any thoughts. Jacob, this is a family meeting. Everyone is free to voice their thoughts. I will consider your suggestions if you come up with any good ideas. Hector encouraged. All right, then I'll tell you what I think. Jacob cleared his throat before he continued. Hector, I know that Natasha is reluctant to marry Tyler, but the consequences of breaking off the marriage alliance are severe. I think that we should just change our strategy slightly. Oh, change our strategy? How so? Hector asked with a lift of his brows. It's simple. There are many eligible young ladies in the Harmon family who are of marriageable age. Since your daughter is unwilling to marry Tyler, then we'll send someone else to marry him. As long as we have a marriage alliance, it doesn't matter who marries him, Jacob said plainly. Send someone else? The rest of the family began whispering among themselves when they heard Jacob's suggestion. It seemed like a decent enough proposal. Natasha might not agree to marry Tyler, but there were other people who would readily agree to the marriage. Tyler was an excellent candidate that many women would die to be married to. But Jacob, there has been so much conflict between the two families. No matter who we send to marry Tyler, we'd be sending her into an extremely risky situation. Hector was torn as to whether or not he should take Jacob's suggestion. Someone has got to take one for the family. Since your daughter is unwilling to be the one to do so, we'll just have to get someone else, Jacob said. You're right, but who else would be good enough for Tyler? Trent pondered for a suitable candidate. They could not just send any other girl to marry Tyler. He was General Lionheart, a truly brilliant man. Natasha was the only one in the entire Harmon family who was barely good enough for him. Me. Just then, Kate stood up and declared confidently, be it looks or ability, I'm not far off from Natasha. I'm the most suitable candidate to marry Tyler.